4 and 5 for about 14 years. And I met Julie a little bit over a year ago, and I was so taken by the idea of conceptual learning, which I had already played with a little bit in math. And I really wanted to see how it could apply to other subject areas, specifically in elementary school. And so that's what really brought me in. And I am just die hard into teaching for conceptual understanding. I think it's the way of the future. I think it's how to get kids to start actually doing meaningful engaging tasks in their classroom, and also bringing that into their lives beyond the school walls. So I actually recently was hired as an instructional coach for K-12 in a new district. And I've also been working with Julie to train teachers all around the world in the idea of conceptual learning and facilitating transfer. And so today I'm going to give you just a little bit of a nugget of what that could look like specifically in the ELA classroom to boost not just novel studies, but also, any literature, picture books, even a poem, to be honest, because really the piece of literature just serves as the catalyst for everything else. So that's what we're going to get into today. So the reason that I'm here is, for me, I've just become so frustrated, like a lot of us, especially people in the US, with just a system that puts standards and skills at the heart of learning at the expense of student engagement, relevance, and opportunities that actually prepare them for the future. So instead, I'm really inspired by learning experiences that, of course, shape skills, but more than that, I appreciate the ones that put kids in the driver's seat, allow for real risk-taking, choice, meaningful, real-world action, and experiences that actually prepare kids for the future. And that's what brought me to Julie and brought me here with you. So you are on the right call if you feel that students lack real connection to what you're teaching, you desire to find better ways to connect students' lives to instruction, and you wonder if the students are actually taking any of the messages you're trying to convey to them with them beyond the classroom. Because to be honest, a lot of us understand that we are really in a culture of compliance in the classroom, and we really want to move beyond that. We want that intrinsic motivation, kids who are passionate and excited to do something meaningful. So what do we do about it? Engaging students in a unit that places conceptual transfer at the heart of instruction is an excellent way to address a lot of these frustrations and become re-inspired and drive real learning and impact. Many of you may be familiar with Zaretta Hammond and her recent publication on culturally responsive teaching. And one of the things she says is that the brain tries to understand how things are organized into a system. It wants to understand how information is connected and the role new information plays as it interacts with other events, objects, or concepts. And she is absolutely right. We all come to school with a different background, a different experience, and a different understanding of the concepts at play in front of us. And finding ways to intentionally structure learning experiences to build those concepts is why we're here. It's where we're at. And all of that is this idea of conceptual understanding and conceptual transfer. So there is an abundance of incredible literature out there. I mean, from the classics to award-winning new reads, there's a ton of beautiful stories about the human experience, no matter what genre. And novels and literature provide the perfect context for exploration of larger concepts. So this webinar is intended to guide you in planning a unit using a chosen novel or picture book or piece of literature as your guide for deepening conceptual understanding of the human experience concepts that are present within the text. Things like challenge, perseverance, humility, but then also concepts that are embedded in our literacy standards like theme, character, purpose, and all that good stuff. So I promise I'm going to give you everything I can in our time together. And I know there are a few of you who are definitely going to want more or have questions, and we will be giving you not just the resources Julie already put into the chat, which are all the slides with some links to that workbook she mentioned, but also we'll let you know some other resources we have if you want to go deeper with some of the things you hear from me today.
Okay, so Jess asked me to briefly explain concepts. Many of you know what concepts are, but for us, it's when we're talking about literature in particular, there's two buckets. If you're familiar with the work of my former mentors, Lynn Erickson and Lois Lanning, they kind of talk about knowledge concepts and process concepts. And we sort of renamed those in our latest publication to human experience concepts and design concepts. Why? Why did we do that? The main reason why we did that was because we wanted to really punctuate the purpose of the theme, often called theme in literature, like friendship, insecurity, belonging, coming of age. That's a really big one. Justice or redemption. All of those things point to how literature helps us to really understand what it means to be a human.
Mhm.
And so those are important. And Jess is really going to hone in on those today. But we also have, like she said, concepts that are typically in our standards documents, such as characterization or mood or word choice. Those are also concepts. So for us, concepts are simply organizing ideas that we want students to think about how they're used in relation to each other in the text. How do they make us feel? How does word choice interact with our feelings of injustice? And all of those things. So that's really what concepts are all about. And we'll be getting into a little bit more detail about both of those throughout this webinar. Okay, so Jess's 5 steps. So here's the part, you get out your pen. I'm also dropping in the resources into chat. We keep having more and more people enter the webinar. So if you just entered, I'm just gonna keep putting this. If you've been in here, you're gonna be like, why does she keep putting this? Because there's more and more people who are entering into the webinar. So those are the resources, but these are the steps that Jess put together. And overall, we just wanna help us aim for the bigger picture. And we want students to think about, how does the study of this story, whether it's Elephant and Piggy books, those are some of the favorites of my young children. If you don't know those, please check them out because they're so great. But even if there's a story, a quick picture book that we flip through, how does reading or studying this story or this novel help me to better understand the human condition? I use those words with my very young children. I have a rising 1st grader and a rising 3rd grader. So I use human experience. This person. There we go. So I use those words like human experience with my young children. So the first step is really thinking about, how does this text help us to better understand the human condition, and how do those language choices like word choice or alliteration or rhyming or setting, the plot, how does all of that impact my life and life on earth? So that's sort of the overall key point we're trying to make here. So Jess's 5 steps that she's going to walk you straight through are, obviously, choose a text, and then from the text, set goals, maybe looking at your standards, all of those things as well. Then, of course, choose the concepts. That's the most important. So from the text, what does the text tell us about the concepts that are most relevant and prevalent there? And then plan a unit overview with specific context. So we use the word context to say, weave in other texts, weave in songs, weave in cartoons, weave in the real world, weave in lots of things that sort of illustrate those same concepts. And then, of course, plan a week of instruction. So those are the things Jess is going to take you guys through during this webinar.
All right, so let's do it. Choosing a text. So a lot of you might be coming here today already with a text in mind, or you might already have a novel study that you do or a literature study you do in your classroom that you kind of just want to tweak or add some things to. So regardless, that's fine. But some of the things you really want to think about, a lot of us are driven by what students really like. We know students love this book, they love this book, so we use it. And that's important for sure. But you also want to think about your grade level curriculum, not just the standards, but also topics in your content area. What concepts come out of there a lot? Like I know as a 4th or 5th grade teacher, the concepts of conflict, cooperation, freedom, justice, all of those things come up all the time in social studies. And why not choose something in language arts that maybe doesn't have anything to do with even a historical context, but also has those same concepts present so that we can build connection and help kids see that it doesn't just exist in English class or in reading class or in social studies class. The other thing that is so huge right now is the socio-emotional competencies. I mean, we all know, from right before COVID, when COVID hit, even after COVID, we're experiencing students that just don't have the same skill set in these areas that they did prior to COVID. And it's not just COVID, it's the rise of technology, it's all of the different access they have to things. SEL competencies are super, super huge, and you can absolutely incorporate them very easily in the ELA classroom. And of course, equity is something we should always be thinking about. We want to be careful when we're choosing text, making sure that we are exposing our students to diverse experiences and also providing various lenses. So some of the literature I'm going to reference in this webinar, I kind of wanted to spread the gamut of the elementary, grades K through 5. Stand Tall, Molly Lou Mellon, adorable story about a little girl and her grandmother and her becoming herself. So I'll reference that book for grades K and 1. The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. I don't think I can still read that without shedding a tear. It is one of the most amazing books out there, and that's perfect for grade 2 or 3. And then for grades 4 and 5, I chose Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper. And that one's actually going to be the one that I reference the most because I actually taught that unit to my 5th graders last year. So I have a lot of resources for you with that one. The other thing you want to think about is nonfiction pairings. So you want to consider the conceptual connections in the content area, like I already mentioned, and think about texts you could pull in there. Also, some real world child-friendly news articles. There's a lot of different resources out there. Ones that I use a lot are, Time Magazine has one that's for kids. Newsela is an incredible resource. There's a lot of nonfiction on there, and you can search by topic or concept. And I'm sure that you all know a lot of them too. And of course, we all have fantastic librarians in our schools. Use them. I know I just came from a school. I think my librarian from my school is on this call right now. She was fantastic, and I would go to her for a lot of recommendations.
I love you.
So the one thing I want to say about this, though, is be careful, because I feel like when teachers pull in nonfiction material to their ELA classroom, it tends to be very topic driven. For example, in the book Out of My Mind, that story is about a little girl who has cerebral palsy. And certainly we want kids to understand what that disability is and what it entails. And that's important for background building. But sometimes we are really, we only see, okay, I'm just going to pull an article on cerebral palsy or disabilities. And that's super topic driven. What I'm talking about is something that's maybe beyond a person with a disability that has the same concept of challenge and communication and language, but not in that same context of a little girl living in school with a disability. It might be a completely different context. So I'll get into that a little bit more later, but that is one of the major shifts that's different from what you might typically do to what we're trying to show here. So step 2 is the goal setting. Once you have the book and you're feeling really great about it, you want to ask yourself, what are some of the skills that I want to develop using this book? And then also, what are some of my transfer goals? There are a ton of them. And in the slides that Julie sent in the chat, you will see that this is much more filled out in that version. But in the interest of respecting your time, I just put a couple of examples here. So some of the skills you might choose to develop are, decoding multisyllabic unknown words, reading fluently, comprehending text, analyzing how author develops theme. These are things you've all heard before. There might be more, and you might want to pick which you're going to really dig into with this text, which you've always done. But some transfer goals you might think about, for me with this book, Out of My Mind, I wanted my kids to leave having a better understanding of disability and really consider the perspective of a person who lives with a disability, and also examine their biases and prejudices and assumptions that they make about a person with a disability. And that comes up a lot in this text. Again, my brain is just thinking right now, I didn't do this, but I wish I would have. These things come up a lot also. We studied colonial America and immigration and people coming in, and there's a lot of these concepts of bias and prejudice coming up in that completely different context that could transfer from this book. So you want to think about, what are some of those things I can do? Don't pick too many. Certainly we're not changing the world with one book, but pick a few to focus on. And then you want to design your assessment. So, we really follow with our conceptual learning and transfer, we really follow Jay McTighe's backward design. It's really powerful. It's been shown to work. So you're thinking about your goals, and then you're thinking about how you will assess those goals. And then we'll move into planning the learning experiences. Some assessment ideas that you might already use are small group, guided reading, curricular assessments, but some that you might not have thought about yet are answers to conceptual questions, which I'll show you what one of those is in a few moments here. Concept mapping, which is incredibly powerful, especially when you go between contexts. If you can imagine different concepts on a board and kids drawing connections to say how they're related when they're studying, for example, something in language arts, and then you pull in a context from social studies and they add to it, they start thinking, oh my gosh, this really is everywhere. And then another huge one is getting kids to make predictions about future scenarios, but using evidence from what they've already learned in other contexts. So there are a lot more of these in the slides, but these are just a few ideas of some different assessments you may not have considered before, but that really push kids to use what they're learning and continue connecting to other things. Okay, so step 3, choosing the concepts. Julie did a beautiful job explaining the difference between human experience concepts and design concepts. These are some that come up a lot in a lot of books: identity, adaptability, discipline, choice, advocacy, and design concepts. I think they're different for fiction and nonfiction. It's important to bring that up. In fiction, you see more like theme, character, setting, figurative language, plot events. But in nonfiction, you see more main idea, text structure, word choice, and point of view. So this is one of the strategies. One of Julie's publications, Learning That Transfers, she and her co-authors have a multitude of different strategies and resources, some of which I've included for you in those slides in that workbook. But one of them is to ask students what concepts live here. And I actually use this strategy myself when I'm planning what I'm going to use for different books. So in Out of My Mind, you can see I've listed a ton of different concepts that are present, and certainly this isn't an exhaustive list, but some that really jump out to me when I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about SEL, I'm thinking about curricular connections, and I'm thinking about equity. Adaptability and conflict are definitely opportunities for connection and transfer to social studies, as I already referenced, topics like settlement, historical wars, anything like that. Similarly, prejudice and stereotype, they are a major part of our guidance curriculum and huge components of SEL social awareness. And then identity and disability are major players when we're thinking of this equity lens that we're trying to provide, as I absolutely want students to really view the world through a lens that they might have not considered before, like they will with our main character, Melody. So the next step is to think about building conceptual questions. Julie, if you could pop the question stems into chat just to give an idea. They're also in those slides. Learning That Transfers, that book actually outlines a lot of different question stems you can use, and you take those concepts you just decided you really want to push with your kids and you pop them just right into the question stem. So here's one: what is the relationship between concept and concept? In this case, I thought, well, I really want them to think about the relationship between conflict and adaptability. In our other two examples, this, Stand Tall, Molly Lou Mellon, and The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, there are concepts in Stand Tall, Molly Lou Mellon, like identity, family, and pride. And in Edward Tulane, we have a lot of compassion, purpose, and kindness. So some questions you might come up with there are: what is the role of family in identity? Or what effect does compassion have on relationships? And these, again, are things you can explore within the context of that novel, but also beyond in other contexts and with self. One of the design questions you might ask is: how does the author craft character to convey theme? And one reason I really want to push this, if you're a US teacher, can you just write like, here, yes, from the US? There's a lot of standardized assessments in the US. And one thing that was pushed on, the school that I used to be in, was this idea of analytical writing on the standardized test, where kids had to read something and they had to analyze how the author was using different elements of fiction. And studying something like this, how does the author craft character to convey theme, can help kids really analyze text without you feeling like you have to teach them like steps to analyze text. They just do it naturally because they're kind of moving between contexts and grasping a firmer understanding of those things. So step 4 is our unit overview. This is just, everything big picture. We want to make sure we're including, obviously, standards and objectives, facts and skills, an assessment plan, but also concepts and conceptual questions like those that you might have just seen, and then varying contexts to explore conceptual questions. And in this webinar, I'm really going to focus on these two. If you go into the linked materials that were shared, you'll see that I have a whole unit outline shared, an example of what I did for Out of My Mind. But I really want to dig into how you move between contexts to explain that further, because I do think that the conceptual questions and connections are the major piece of trying to get kids to transfer, and what would look very different from what you might already be doing. So this one is based on Out of My Mind. One of the questions I posed to the kids was, what is the difference between language and communication? And, you always want to assess for prior knowledge first. So obviously the kids start answering this question. They're like, oh, well, people who live in different countries speak different languages, so that's how they communicate. Which is a very superficial understanding of language and communication. But of course, in their experience, it makes sense. But sadly, we certainly don't want them to leave 12th grade with that same understanding of language and communication. And I think that that's what happens sometimes. So how can we grow that? What can we do? we can start with examining Melody's situation, the main character in Out of My Mind. What is she doing to communicate, and what language is she using? Certainly, she's in an English speaking household and she would love to speak English, but she can't because she's unable to speak or move most of her body because of her condition. So she finds other ways to communicate. And kids start realizing, wait, there's this difference between verbal and nonverbal. So you can explore verbal and nonverbal communication as well, including different world languages, and look at things that are the same and different. But then you might choose to move into a context that's a little bit more dissimilar, is the word we would use. So we're moving away from, what the normal, I guess, what the typical understanding of language communication, saying, okay, well, let's look at this video of these dancers who, the example I have, and I'll link that too. It's actually in the slides. You can see exactly what I did with my students. There was a dance that I showed them. These people were trying to send the message that money is not everything, and people are driven too much by money, and they're making horrible decisions and ruining the earth. So there's this dance that really shows that. And so you might show that to kids and say, where do you see language and communication here? What is being communicated and what language is being used? And at first it might confuse them because they're thinking, well, no one's talking, but isn't dance a kind of language? And isn't it being used to communicate something? And then they're like, oh, and suddenly this bigger idea of what these things mean starts to emerge. And then you might, transfer even farther out to something more meaningful, like historical events, like studying some of the civil rights actions that have been taken in the past, including sit-ins and peaceful resistance. And you might ask again, where do you see language and communication here? And they might say, oh my God, they are communicating a message so powerfully. I heard one time, I don't remember who said this quote, but silence is, the silence is so loud sometimes, and it's so true. So you can investigate those different things. And now the kids, certainly they're practicing skills. While you go through these contexts, you can see the resources I listed there. It could be images, videos, picture books. The thing is, kids need to be able to interpret all kinds of media today. It's not just about just reading words on a page. So this also gives a lot of opportunity to do that too. So sometimes you don't start with the novel. Sometimes the concepts in the novel are very nuanced and hard for kids to grasp, especially kids who are in second and third grade. So you might start with contexts that are a little easier to grasp to branch out to that. So for example, in Edward Tulane, I might ask, what is the relationship between identity and purpose? And those are some major heavy concepts for second and third graders. And really what I want them to see is that, that little bunny rabbit serves such a huge purpose to all the different people that he was a part of their lives in that story. And it's such an emotional story. And there's so much that he did for those people, which is a part of his identity. But a second or third grader is not just going to get that because you read the book. But if you start earlier and you say, okay, let's explore how tools or games or supplies serve specific purposes, something. If the identity of something is a game, what does that usually mean? What does it entail? What does it have? And you could do that through songs, videos, poems. I mean, you could do it through playing games. You could find any context to do it really to get them talking. Then you might move in and say, okay, how, just like those tools served a certain purpose, how do people serve different purposes? Like a teacher or a helper or a doctor or a musician. What are they doing? What is that identity that they're carrying, and what purpose do they serve? And you might use different picture books to do that. I've seen that done really well before in a grade 2 classroom. And then you might move into something where you're exploring what has Edward Tulane done? What is his identity and what purpose is he serving? And because you went through these different ways of showing how something can serve a bigger purpose, whether it's an object or a friend, which is a little closer, all the way out to this character in this book, they're going to be able to carry that with them a lot more easily. And then I did add another context here. You'll see in a lot of the linked materials and a lot of the learning that transfers information, we're trying to really get kids all the way to this novel real world application. And certainly don't have to always do that. I know that can feel overwhelming sometimes, but in this case, I think it makes sense to then move to self and say, okay, well, how can we choose our purpose? What do we want to do, or how do we want to make other people feel, and what can we physically do that fulfills that purpose? And that could transition into an all about me project, which I've seen 1,000 times, but not with that heavy purpose behind it. A lot of times it's just, we started the school year, give me this poster about you, cool, you like blue. This is so much bigger than that, and just brings another layer and a lot more meaning to the human piece. So I know I can hear you all saying right now, but what about the skills? You haven't talked about, like, when are we having guided reading? When are we talking about vocab? All those things that I'm sure you do all the time, but they are here. You can practice the ELA skills while engaging in authentic, real world, meaningful exploration. And the kids are going to be so much more motivated to learn and practice these skills when they're using them to understand something that's a bigger picture. They're going to want access to those complex texts. They're going to want to stop and figure out what the word means that they can't understand because they want to know what it says. So it's so much better than these canned texts I've seen all over the place where, we're just practicing to get that short A down, which is important. But if we can do it while also showing them, look, here's why you want to do it. You want to be able to access this and understand it. It's so much more motivating and so much more powerful. So what does a week look like then? Where are the skills? Where's all this stuff I'm talking about? This is a lot of text and it might look overwhelming at first. This is 1 week of what I actually did. I physically did this with the book Out of My Mind with my students. And I'm not going to read it all to you right now. You can see it for yourself in the linked materials. But what I do want to point out about this is you'll see I've color coded the days, and the orange days, or not the days, the orange pieces of text are what you would typically see in a novel study in the classroom. Things like, essential questions, vocab practice, small group instruction, partner reading, independent reading, annotation. All of those things you usually do are shown here in orange. The blue is what has been layered in to build this conceptual understanding we're talking about and really prepare kids to transfer what they're understanding into other contexts and into future situations. So these things might be.
Yes, if I could just jump in here, because I love what you have here. And I think it really illustrates that we don't need to throw out everything that we're doing. And I recognize a lot of you who are logged in here. And so many of you might be like, yeah, we're preaching to the choir for those of you who are live with us right now. But I also think many of you are leaders. You're leading other teachers who are maybe new to this. And I think what this illustrates, and the reason why I especially love, can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
I love how Jess did this of like, all she did was the same slide color coded. So then go forward one slide, Jess, just to sort of show where are the skills and where is this sort of more human experience, conceptual understanding, so that teachers can see how we're really kind of tweaking what they already do. And that's so nice. For somebody who's been working for 22 years in education and 20 years with teachers, it's really important to affirm what they're already doing and to make them realize that what we're saying is not throwing out what they're already doing, but simply tweaking. And I think that's what's so great about Jess. She's obviously, you guys know her, you can see already if you're just meeting Jess, she's a mover and a shaker. She's really one of those incredible, passionate teachers, like obviously many of you are, who are logging on over the summertime for this free webinar. But what she's doing is saying, oh my gosh, Julie, here's how I used to plan a novel study. And then the small tweaks that I've made. And so in a lot of ways, it's not, radically different, but the results with the students are, they feel radically different. And I think that's what's so great about these somewhat minor tweaks to how we would do instruction. And then the students just shock us. I was putting into chat how younger kids are often better than my background is high school age students, and that's my passion. I have little kids, but I love give me the 14-year-olds, who's just dealing with puberty and all the things of life, and just guiding them through that. But the older they get, it's almost like they forget some of that creativity that you're talking about here. How do we see tools? You use the idea of tools, like actual tools, and then can people be a tool? I could see a 14-year-old going, you are crazy. But the younger kids are like, oh yeah, I'm so with you. I can see this. And so that's what I love about young children, especially. Their imagination is not yet limited by the world in the same ways in which older children or even adults have limited their imagination. So I just wanted to add that there. And we do have time for questions. So any questions that you guys might be wanting to have, pop them into chat. I see Jonathan is raising his hand. If you want to just put your questions into chat, and that way Jess can keep going and we can answer your questions towards the end. So Jonathan, if you could put your question into chat, and then Jess can keep going. We're almost to the question portion as well. So we want to open it up. So if you don't have a question, be thinking of one.
Yes. So the next thing I wanted to do was kind of zoom in even further and show you some of the specific strategies that I used with students when trying to get them to really understand these concepts. So before you ask students a conceptual question, and I mean after you've asked it to them to see what they already know about it, of course, you really want to make sure that they do have a pretty firm understanding, even if it's only superficial, of what the concept even is. And something that's majorly powerful that I have figured out, and I should have put the slide in here. I have these two triangles in my brain all the time. I think a lot of times we tell kids, okay, you know, if the concepts are language and communication, we say, okay, guys, here's language, here are different examples. Can you think of more examples? And when you do that, you've already started shifted their thinking pattern to go the direction you were already thinking of without even realizing it. And so sometimes it's better to start with a more open-ended question where you don't give the concept or the relationship, and you show something like this, whether it be pictures or it could be a video, it could be different words. I mean, the opportunities are endless, what you might choose, but ask them, what do you notice about these things you're looking at, and what do they have in common? And they might not always get to what you were thinking at first, and that's okay, because what you're doing is you're helping them open up all these different areas in their mind that they can then connect to what we're trying to get to here. So here I might ask, you know, what do these things have in common? And I imagine kids would say, well, someone's mad. I see an angry woman. I see these two people, if you can see it, the girl saying, I'm mad at you. And he's like, for what? And then there's a written note that says, how are you feeling today? So they're going to notice that emotion of anger first, and that's fine. But you might say, think about some more. What else are you noticing? And what we hope that they can get to is realizing that these are all different forms of communication. You know, sometimes we communicate using facial expressions. Sometimes we communicate with talking and listening. Sometimes we communicate with reading and writing. And as you can imagine with those examples I showed you, this is where it would start. And then after engaging in some of those other contexts, they might add things to this like, oh, well, we can also communicate through dance. We can also communicate through a screenplay or a song. Or, you know, if you're fortunate enough to become like a famous entertainer, what a platform you have to communicate something that matters to the world. Or if you're an athlete, what a powerful thing you can communicate to the world about discipline and teamwork and empowerment and working together. So these things can grow, and they did. I watched it grow so much. I mean, we had this on my backboard and we just kept adding and adding and adding to it every time we learned something new. And it was huge by the end. The kids were like, whoa, I totally understand communication now, way more than I did before we started all of this. And then what you might have kids do after they've engaged in what that was called a concept attainment is a strategy that we call see it, where, you know, you basically just state the definition of something like, you know, the concept of communication is the process of sending and receiving information. That's a great elementary definition. But then you ask the students, can you elaborate on that? Can you tell me in your own words what it might be? And then they can do that, and they can say, you know, well, in other words, it's someone talking and someone listening, or whatever they might say. And then exemplify is the best one, because this is the one that I think kind of graduates and grows over time with the different examples and ways that we might choose to send and receive. And that's what's growing that concept. And the reason that's so important is because when kids see a concept grow across context, you're setting them up for a situation where now when they go out into the world, they might look at a situation that's completely novel to them and see these concepts present in the situation. Kind of like that video we showed you in the beginning. We said, you know, in this Coldplay video, what concepts do you see here? What you wrote down might change after certain learning experiences. And that helps them to be able to be creative and solve some of the world's problems. And then illustrate is another way when we're thinking through an equity lens, especially when we're thinking of, you know, UDL and representation. It gives another way for kids to really share out what they're thinking about this concept and how they might represent it. And you could do this, it says, you know, drawing tools, a metaphor, but it could be, you know, it could be Play-Doh, it could be, they could be painting something, they could build something out of blocks and say, look, see how this shows communication, and they will blow your mind, by the way, when you ask them to do things like that. So all of that is a part of this strategy. And then this strategy I wanted to share with you, and this is linked in your slides, but this link links out to the slideshow that showed those different contexts about language and communication that I referenced. And this is the tool that I had students use to collect their thinking. It's called a click tool, which is another strategy that is published in that Learning That Transfers book that I was talking about. And conversations are awesome because it's a way to get kids to engage in different contexts quickly. Instead of, some of you might have thought when I was going through that, wow, this is going to take like 6 years to get through this. Not necessarily. It depends on how you structure it. So these could be different centers in your classroom where you spend a class period having kids collect different ideas and examples about what communication is, for example. And they're all completely different. And it's a great way to get them to transfer understanding of concepts between contexts quickly too.
Oh, this is my turn. So I love this visual because really that's what we're doing is training our students to see concepts, to look for concepts in multiple situations. And so this is what I love to see with my own children. In fact, I have to share this win with you guys. Yesterday, Mihai is on, who's our PE lead. And Jess, I haven't even shared this with our group chat. I share everything about my kids, but I didn't want to be like bragging. We got the social emotional learning like report card from school yesterday, and they both scored the highest in all categories. I was like, and this is what I said to them, boys, I'm not sure this is even true, but good job. I'm so the abuela from Encanto. But I was so proud of them, of me, of my husband, because parenting is so hard. But with these ways in which I talk to my students, my own children, I should say, it's really getting them to recognize things like challenge, things like self-discipline. I talked to my 6 and 8-year-olds ever since they were like, couldn't even talk. We would have what my husband calls my little chats. And he's like, you always have your little chats with our children. And yesterday, Alex, my oldest, was at soccer camp and he said, Mom, I had the worst day of my life. And I was like, what happened? Tell me. I mean, he's a bit dramatic. I have no idea where he gets it from. But he said, I had the worst day of my life. And he starts telling me at soccer camp, all the things that happened to him. And I said, okay, I'm really sorry. First, empathy, right? Like, I'm really sorry that happened to you. That's really a bummer. And, next, like, how can we problem solve? Like, are you in a place where you're ready to problem solve? So I said, I'm going to play back the story for you. And I want you both, along with his brother, to identify things you could have done differently, because who's the only person you can control? And then he's like, me. This is like a message that I send to them over and over and over again. So the soccer coaches are like the authority figure. And so I was like, give me some other authority figures in your life, your teachers, your jujitsu coach, your the parents of another kid when they go to another kid's house. Those are all examples of authority figures. My 6 and 8-year-olds can look through their worlds and say, this soccer coach is like my teacher. Even though I think the soccer coach is not as good as my teacher, they're still authority figures. That kid's parent, their aunt, their grandparents, those are all authority figures. And they're different, right? They're not the same. So how can they think about how they're going to respond in these different situations? They're looking for the concepts of sort of respect and self-determination or self-discipline, really self-management. We talk a lot about those concepts, and those are so gorgeous coming from stories. So no matter what we're reading, if we're reading, they're both little boys, so we read all the little, like any books that have potty words or whatever, Captain Awesome, Captain Underpants, all of those. We read all of those books. It's kind of painful for me to read to them sometimes, but we're pulling out the lessons every single time so that they can look for those lessons in their lives. And so that's what we're just really beautiful about teaching in this way, is teaching our young people how to look for those lessons. And I remember, Jess, I just want to share this story with you, with everybody that you shared with me, because Jess taught 5th grade. So that's more the higher ends of elementary, of going through our Goodbye to Overwhelm course. We have a free course on our platform if you haven't checked it out before, but it's for adults. We create these courses for adults, for us to sort of work on our own mental health. And Jess started using those types of tricks and tools with her 5th graders, getting them to recognize, is that a fact or is that a thought response? Because that's a concept in the Goodbye to Overwhelm. Mihai, I don't know if you want to add, because Mihai has middle school age children himself, and I know he's uses all of this stuff with his own children. They know what a thought response is. They know what a concept is. They can really link those together. And so that's just really beautiful. Mihai, I see you unmuted. You want to share something?
Yeah, I just it's like a virus, this mindset once you have children, because it's coming back to you. It's gonna hunt you. So what you're planning is gonna come maybe like 10 times more. And the kids, yeah, I have an MIP student and PYP, so it's getting tough. But it's so rewarding. So yeah, you should. I hope we will see in bigger numbers in our courses. Looking forward to it.
Yes, definitely. So any questions that we have? So I just want to make it out, say this out loud, especially for the recording, because people won't be able to see the chat, I don't think, in the recording. So one thing that Krista is sharing about reminds me to make the steps explicit, and remind everyone that we're building off of their great work. So those were the two observations that Krista wanted to make there. Hi, Krista, I'm glad you could make it. And then another question that Jonathan put out there was the difference between conceptual questions, acquire, connect, and compelling, because our book does talk about compelling questions as well. And so in a nutshell, the acquire phase, for those of you who are familiar, we didn't go into the ACT model here, but for those of you who are familiar with it, acquire is simply a single concept. So we want to first, that would be that concept attainment that Jess put up of communication. What is communication? That would be the acquire phase. And then once they've acquired that, we start to connect two or more concepts. Once they've acquired one or two, especially two concepts by themselves, the connect phase is where they start to think about those concepts in relationship. And there's where the conceptual relationship question stems that we put earlier really make that attention to how concepts interact. That's where deeper learning happens. And that's where students really shock us with their understanding. Okay, so, and then compelling is really to sort of capture students' attention. They're debatable, they're philosophical. And so that's what compelling questions are. If you're IB, many of you I know are IB schools, IB calls them debatable. So what IB calls factual, to me, are often like in the acquire phase, the way that teachers look at that, or even I should say, when I look at IB unit plans, the questions that are conceptual, they're a single question. And they're not looking at the relationship between two or more concepts. So that's one of the first sort of quick tricks or fixes that I like to do with IB schools is when you label conceptual questions, make sure there's two or more concepts stated in relationship. That's where our question stems fit in. Okay, go ahead. You want to answer Susie's question? Hi, Susie. Good to see you.
Yes, so that's a great question. So Susie said, when you do novel studies, do you have all of your students read the same book or model with one text and have students use their own text? This is such a great question. The thing is, there's a lot of different ways to do this, certainly in the younger grades. And I was just talking with someone about this the other day when they were saying, I don't know about this, novel course. Like my kids don't read novels. They're in second grade. And I said, yeah, but you can do this with a read aloud. So you can use a read aloud where you are using those powerful concepts and having that read aloud be your context. And then add in the picture books and the texts that are accessible for them to be practicing their reading. Or you can do what I did in 5th grade. Out of My Mind was just one of the books. I actually had 3 different groups going, and they were actually based on choice. And I provided different scaffolds and supports, like different audiobooks or support things for my kids when they had to read things on their own. But you could also do it based on level, and you could pick books that have similar concepts in them. So the books that I had in my classroom, I had Out of My Mind, Fish in a Tree, and I also had Rules. So those 3 books all focus on a character who's dealing with some kind of struggle based on something that's different about them. Whether one of them has a learning disability, obviously we talked about the girl with cerebral palsy, and the other child has autism. So the stories are completely different, but that was the thing that I chose to use to connect them. And the kids were all reading a different novel, but the concepts and the nonfiction texts and the different pairings I put in were whole group, if that makes sense. But there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. You could also use the same novel for the whole class, but then make sure that you're differentiating as far as level and everything with the paired text that you're using. That's another way you could do it. So whatever you think is meeting the goal you have the most would be the way to organize it.
I think that that's such a great question. And I don't have very strong opinions, except except to say that there should be a variety of things. Of course, we all now are agreeing that we shouldn't have the same text, maybe like the whole year. And this is more of an issue with secondary, especially Shakespeare. I feel like when I work with a lot of British oriented schools, I see some of you on here, they're like, well, this is our unit on Macbeth. Like clearly, and we're all going to slowly read Macbeth for like 12 weeks. Yeah. I'm not sure I love that. I would say maybe choose excerpts of Macbeth that are really trying to illustrate the point. But even if you are, like, for example, we had someone say to me, Julie, we have to read Charlotte's Web. We have to read that, like that. And everybody in the class has to read it. And that has to be the whole unit. It was what their district said had to be the whole unit. So they didn't have a lot of choice, but I had so much fun thinking about Charlotte's Web and what are the themes of Charlotte's Web? Family, just like passing on through generations, heritage. So you guys, I have a whole Spotify playlist if you guys want it, of like Lupe Fiasco's Old School Love. If you listen to that song, it is all the same sort of conceptual ideas of Charlotte's Web in that song, Old School Love. And so just coming up with songs, poems, political cartoons. This morning, Mihai will love this. This morning, the like chat I had with my kids was the scene from Ted Lasso of the darts. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google Ted Lasso dart scene and play that for your children. Play that. There is at the very end, there's a curse word. So make sure you cut it off before if you're sharing this with your elementary students. Yes. But I showed that to my young children today because I was like, what do you see here? What concepts do you see? It's not about darts. That's not what the scene is about. It's about much deeper than that. And my 6 and 8-year-old identified the human experience concepts that are present in that scene. So no matter what, really mixing in lots of different thinking expansively, of course, about text, to be clips from TV shows, all of those things, mixing it in.
And Julie, you bring up something really great when you mentioned, that's our unit on Macbeth. That's one of the major shifts. It's not your unit on Macbeth. It's not your unit on Out of My Mind. It's your unit on insert concepts here. And that novel is one of the contexts you're going to use to explore that question or those concepts more. And there's so many different pieces of literature that you can use. All the things you're practicing, the skills don't have to all be in the book. The book is just another resource you're using. You can pull other things for kids to be practicing and learning and interpreting beyond the book. The book you should see it as another resource to teach this thing that's bigger.
That's such a good point, Jess. When I was director of curriculum and when I'm working with a lot of schools, I often encourage them to center the concepts. So instead of my Charlotte's Web unit, what we would put, because the district says you have to do it, this is our way to sort of get around it. We would say, this is our unit about tradition and heritage in the context of Charlotte's Web. That was our whole unit title. We made sure that the concepts were the first things that really are signaling to the teacher and the students that that's what this unit is about. Mihai, yes. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jess.
I was going to say, it really opens the door to more transdisciplinary connections, because so often I see, and I don't mean to criticize because I understand it, but I see an attempt to make things transdisciplinary, especially in K2, that's very themey. So it'll be like, we're studying frogs in science, so we're adding frogs in math or something. And it's, it's very cute. And I see the theme, I see what you're doing, but why not do it in a more powerful way with a concept that's connecting everything? Because then you can have very different contexts. It doesn't have to be the same topic. It has to be the same concepts.
So like frogs, it would be about survival or living things or exactly.
Yes, all that.
Go ahead, Mihai.
Yes, I think Jonathan asked a nice question about what's similar and what's dissimilar.
Yes,
I think that's the core of our discussion here. Just lands so well here. And maybe Jonathan can share what is he teaching, so then one of us can provide a good example for it.
Sure. Jonathan, what do you teach?
I don't teach, but I'm the head of academics for primary, so in an IB school. But primarily, I've taught 5th grade and I specialize in literacy. So, yeah.
So it's similar in literacy in particular. Similar would probably be like one story to another story. and dissimilar is more like what we're talking about here, like how do, living things, if we're talking about Charlotte's Web and we're talking about heritage and we're talking about tradition, so then we're going to go to something really different, like frogs, like what is sort of the heritage? We're going to science, we're going to PE, we're going to typically we think about dissimilar transfer as just being very far from the original context. So kind of gradually moving students along that plane. But PYP schools generally don't struggle with that. I've seen more sort of US or Canadian or British centric schools having a hard time with the idea of dissimilar transfer, but PYP in general are like, oh yeah, cool, we got this. We can go dissimilar transfer. So we always just say it's based on your context. It's based on what you're most comfortable with. Don't feel compelled to go dissimilar if that doesn't feel right for you. But that's a very good question.
Yeah.
So similar is basically text to text, and dissimilar is a transdisciplinary connection.
That would be
Yeah.
the easiest way to explain it. Very good.
Yes.
Very good summary. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let's go to, unless you guys have any other questions, we just have 4 minutes left. So let's go to, if you want some more, just some offerings. Mihai's already mentioned a couple times our different courses. So if you want more, I know some of you have taken these courses. So we've got 8 different discipline specific courses, including our elementary learning that transfers course. So something that Jess and I want to do. If you want more, if you don't, no problem, we'll send you these materials. But if you want more, we thought let's do a bonus offer for people who are taking their time out of their summer to come to this webinar. So we're offering 10% off a 30-minute one-on-one. We have live calls, but they're everybody enrolled in the courses. So if you'd like a 30-minute call with your unit with Jess, if you register by July 31st, you can get that. And we have an introductory course that we just built. And so you get a free introductory course as well. So just shoot us an email, info@learningthattransfers.com by July 31st to let us know that you want to take us up on this, answer any questions that you guys might have about these courses. We're happy to do that. So this is something that we want to offer you guys. And thank you so much. So that's the same email, info@learningthattransfers.com. A couple of you wanted certificates. So please shoot us an email to let us know. And our amazing head of operations, Julia Briggs, will speak of the devil. She's coming in right now. Our amazing head of operations, Julia Briggs, will create a webinar, a certificate for those of you who maybe want one for attending this webinar. Otherwise, any questions, comments, concerns, I just want to say so thank you to Jess for putting this together. Amazing to share. She just said, Julie, I want people to experience what I've experienced. And she shared all of her wonderful resources with everybody today. I will email you with the recording as well as that slide deck with the other resources there and this other bonus offer that we're doing. Cheryl, shoot us an email at info@learningthattransfers.com so that we can take care of that for you. Thank you guys so very much. Thanks, Mihai, for joining us. Thanks to you, Jess. You're amazing. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic summer, and I hope you'll stay in touch with our community.
Thank you so much, everyone.